The prior highest verdict was about 36 million. And so when you get 2.5 or plus times that amount, it certainly brings a lot of attention.
Are there any AI tools already that you would say, go look at these straight away?
Software on your balance sheet is an asset, just like your employees are an asset and not a liability. So really start thinking, well, okay, this may cost me $300 a seat, but boy, it's going to save me from hiring 5 different people. Increasingly, the work of law is tied to tech. So if you can understand and master the tech, you're going to have a good career as a lawyer.
So, welcome to the podcast, Ryan. By way of introductions, I saw a bit of a trend on your LinkedIn where you introduce your experience by saying that one time. And I think this description of yours is a nice segue into what we might dive into today. That one time, I built a personal injury law firm from nearly nothing to one that has been listed twice on the Inc. 5000, has nearly 40 people, over 600 5-star reviews, and a $100 million jury verdict. And I may add, that was all in the last 8 years. With that introduction, can you please share with me how you got into law in the first place?
Yeah, I think I got into law. I mean, I was inspired to really help people. I went to college and I wanted to be a teacher, but I ultimately realized that teaching just wasn't what I was meant to do, like in a classroom. I wanted to be a history teacher. I became very interested in government and how government worked and public policy and using policy to help people. And that put me on a path to going to law school. Once I was in law school, I really was like, I wanted to be a lawyer. I want to use my skills to help people represent individuals. So that's what I did. I graduated and I went to work representing, you know, middle class people who had problems. Whether it was a problem with their neighbor or divorce, or maybe their child was arrested or they were in a car accident. I helped them through those times.
Today's episode is sponsored by VXT, the phone system built for law firms. VXT integrates with practice management systems so that when lawyers make calls, their billable time and legal advice can be saved in the right place automatically. 20% of billable time goes unrecorded. A lot of that is phone calls that get forgotten about. Get some of those billables back using VXT. Go to vxt.co.nz or click the link in the description to find out more.
And so, did you join an existing firm at that point of your career?
Yes, I did. I worked at an existing firm for 6.5 years before going out on my own. I went into business with my friend Megan Freed, and we opened up a law firm. Neither of us knew how to run a law firm. We were just excited about doing it and wanted to create something that was modern. A lot of the law firms in the area were older. We wanted to create something that embraced a lot of technology. And we, like a lot of partnerships in law, we made it 1 year. And after 1 year, we decided to go our own ways. Megan and her wife, Kristen, really wanted to focus more on family law. And I ultimately wanted to do more personal injury work.
And so that led you to starting CT Trial Firm.
Yep. I went out on my own for a few years, and then that ultimately led me to starting Connecticut Trial Firm when I shifted my practice away from a sort of general litigation practice into just doing personal injury work.
And I mentioned in the introduction the $100 million verdict. Noting in New Zealand, well, a lot of our listeners are from New Zealand and Australia. Personal injury is not like it is in the US. Can you share a little bit about this case and what led to that verdict?
Yeah, I mean, it's a tragic case where, it's one of these cases like, but for the grace of God, go I, in a way, where we represented this amazing man, Mikey Cruz. And what happened is Mikey worked in a warehouse, and the warehouse was for an electrical distributor. So it's where electricians go where they need wire or light bulbs or fixtures to go do their work for the day. And Mikey was working in this warehouse, and his job would be he'd work at the counter, an electrician would come in and say, I need this and this, and he'd go and get it for them. Well, One of the products that they sold were these TLED light bulbs, and these were made by Philips North America. They're a very popular product at the time because there was a whole bunch of energy efficiency retrofitting incentives by the government. And so these TLED light bulbs were quite popular and profitable. And they were from Philips North America. Philips North America, they're the companies that makes the toothbrushes, the light bulbs, a whole host of things that you use in every day. They ship these light bulbs out to Rexel, the warehouse where Mikey works, and the very simple thing is that they had to unitize the light bulbs to the pallet. So that meant that they had to wrap it or bind it to the pallet. They never wrapped it to the pallet. So instead, it just sat on a slip sheet above, like on the pallet. So there were two units, the pallet and the light bulbs. And what happened is on an adjacent aisle, a temporary worker went to go get some light bulbs on some other light bulbs. He caught the pallet that the light bulbs that fell on Mikey were on, causing them to shift, fall, and paralyze him. And the pallet itself remained up on the rack. So about 1,300 pounds of light bulbs fell from 20 feet, rendering Mikey Cruz paraplegic.
That's terrible. I feel like a lot of the cases that you might have been working with when you were practicing law, did a lot of them have quite sad stories along with them that you'll be dealing with alongside the legal matters?
Yeah, I mean, some of them, I mean, had horrifically sad stories where parents who lost children who lost parents, husbands who lost wives. I mean, those things were incredibly tragic because you can't get life back. But I mean, a good number of cases that we had were people who, their life was disrupted in some way. It was unpleasant more than it was sad. They were in pain. They needed their medical bills paid. They needed their car fixed. They needed money for, maybe not being able to work in the future, those kinds of things, as opposed to, the profound losses of, like I had just mentioned, paralysis and loss of a child, or, we represented sometimes victims of sexual abuse. And just those things are really long term, sort of horrible things to happen to a person.
Mm. And at what stage was Connecticut Trial Firm when that case took place?
We were about 2 years old, maybe a year and a half. So that's we were fairly new as a firm. I had been practicing at that point for like 12 years, but we were new as a firm for sure. And that's when we took the case. And we went from 2.5 people at that point when we met Mikey to about 35 at the time that we ended up trying that case. So we had a lot of growth in those years in between.
And do you think that if you have a large case like that, which is a success, that it helps the growth of your firm? Do you become known for such a case?
No question. It was a historic verdict. Previously, I mean, we have a jury system in the United States that the community, essentially 6 people who are picked from the community that we pick to serve on the jury, render a verdict. And prior to that, the highest jury verdict in Connecticut, the state in which we practice in, which is right between New York and Boston on a map for the people in New Zealand and Australia, the prior highest verdict was about 36 million. And so when you get, essentially, 2.5 or plus times that amount, it certainly brings a lot of attention to the fact that your firm is doing good work.
Was growth always your goal? Was that intentional from the start?
Yeah, growth was the goal for sure. I don't think, I don't think I knew from the beginning how big it would get, but it became a part of the planning for the firm to intentionally get bigger. I think that, if you're out there and you're a business owner, in a lot of ways, like how big you are is a choice. You can choose to stay smaller, you can try to get bigger, but we had indefinitely intended to grow, and we had done so through strategic planning and things like that.
And do you think that there would be a cap for how big you wanted the firm to get to, or was it just infinite growth?
I think that we wanted it to probably get to, at the biggest, about 75 people. After that, it just kind of felt like, Connecticut is not a giant state. We have a population of about 3.4 million people. So it felt like 75 would put us amongst the very largest firms in the state that did this kind of work. And that's where we were headed.
Mm. And we're speaking historically about the firm because recently you've made a career change, and for the first time in 22 years, you won't be working in a law firm. Can you tell us about the new project that you have just started in your new business?
Yeah, I think it comes full circle. So I mentioned earlier that I went to college wanting to be a teacher. So I think that is in me. Teaching and helping are just part of who I am. And, with the firm, I had an opportunity this spring to sell the firm and sell my interest in it. I was offered a position of to be a law professor at the University of Connecticut School of Law teaching, and I had the opportunity through, books I had written, connections I had made to really open up a consulting firm teaching lawyers how to do what it is that I did, really from just the business side of things.
And so, what are the main services going to be that you offer at law firms?
We are going to offer sort of several different services, one of which is being what we want to do is we want to make it accessible. A lot of times, getting good advice in this area is just very expensive, and understandably so. There are very few people who can actually give that advice, and giving it requires a lot of time. You've got to really assess a client's situation and to dig in. But what we wanted to do is we wanted to build sort of like a pyramid where we have accessibility points at the bottom. So we've built a community of lawyers. We've got about 100 lawyers now from around the world in this community who are sharing things, and we'll put on workshops for them and sort of teach in that way via Slack, using a Slack group for that. We're building products in the legal thing. So we're going to build some online courses that people can get into. We've got some books that we're writing. We're doing some card decks for people, some planners. So we've got some things like that that are going to help lawyers run a better business. And then, sort of at the very high end of it, well, I could say one step above that is we're going to do sort of group coaching workshops, that kind of thing. So small groups where we either meet somewhere or they come into us and we work through some problems over a period of days with some different firms. And then on the higher end of things, sort of bespoke consulting, where we get in and we work with firms on a very deep level to build things for their firms. And we also work with legal tech companies, and we work with companies like we're working right now with a staffing company in the legal space to help them build a product for lawyers. So that's sort of the niche that we're occupying.
Awesome. And in terms of the problems that you find law firms are often faced with and might need your help with, what are the most common things that you see?
The most common things that we see are marketing issues, firms not being able to generate as many of the clients it is that they want, financial systems issues. Lawyers, a lot of law firms just don't operate, I think, with financial discipline the way that they need to and clarity surrounding money. That's another one. General law firm organization and things like values and vision and org charts. That's sort of another big one. And then there's just other areas such as like, well, my intake or my sales team, how do I improve this? But I would say that the big one that we see the most of is marketing. We also get ones too about the implementation of technology. So that becomes not the technical implementation, but the organizational. How do I get buy-in for these changes that I want to make regarding technology?
Mm. And drawing another difference with New Zealand is sales and marketing teams either non-existent or not big in New Zealand firms. Can you tell us a little bit about what an ideal sales and marketing team would look like in a law firm?
Yeah, it's really going to depend upon the areas of practice and the size of the firm. But for your listeners, in the United States, I mean, really the way that law firm partners make money is by generating business. And so they typically, the lawyers who can generate business are the ones who have younger lawyers working underneath them, and they can profit from the ability to generate essentially more business than they can handle. Okay. So lawyers are pretty incentivized in whatever their niche to develop a book of business. I assume that's probably true in New Zealand as well, but there's real, I want to say in a lot of law firms, the financial compensation structures are sort of eat what you kill. And so there's lots of incentive to generate business in these structures. So at sort of if you're doing consumer law, like where you're representing people, like I did in personal injury, your firms who are very developed are going to have big marketing teams. I mean, they're going to have social media teams, they're going to have business development teams, which are people who are in community networking. They're going to have events teams where they're putting on events or showing up at conferences. They're going to have media buyers, creatives. I mean, that's gonna sort of run the whole gamut. A lot of firms that I work with will have a marketing director who's basically managing a lot of different vendors. So they're managing the SEO company, or they're managing the paid ads, they're managing the TV spend, and they're working with buyers or different things in that regard. And they're also doing things internally to maybe have events or create marketing. You know, at sort of other, I would say more traditional firms, you have essentially people who help support lawyers by, say, doing press conferences or press releases. They can help make plan events, so a webinar for a firm or something like that. So those are sorts of the traditional, I would say, ways that firms market, and that can also run the gamut. And also, if people are very small, like we see this a lot in firms that are under 10 people or 15 people. The lawyer's the one doing the marketing. They're the ones making the Facebook posts or trying to have the lunches or put on the events.
And so, what was your marketing strategy on day one of Connecticut Trail Law Firm?
Really, I did our marketing on day one at Connecticut Trial Firm. So our strategy was really a fewfold. One of which, we wanted to establish a strong digital presence. So we invested in content and social media, being out there as much as we could digitally, and that was effective. The second thing we did was really invest in client service. And so the best referrals we had came from our existing clients, really, who were happy with us, and they would send us their cousin or something. And finally, the other thing that we really invested in was referral based marketing. So we would go out and meet with lawyers and talk to lawyers around the country and get cases sent to us from all over the place. And that was a good source of business. So that was sort of the three prongs that I did early on at Connecticut Trial Firm.
Nice. I love it. And that question actually came up because I saw one of your LinkedIn posts about what you can do about having no budget when you first start a law firm. So I definitely recommend everyone should follow you on LinkedIn. You're very active and share a lot of great posts. Another great post you shared was about a law firm needing to be a magnet, and that is to both attract clients and attract team members. What can you do as a firm to attract team members and be a magnet to your team?
Yeah, I think it starts with, what are your values as a firm? Because I think who you are attracts like. So if you are a firm that is positive, supportive, tech forward, family friendly, pro sort of healthy work environment, you're going to attract people who are very attracted to that. And the flip is too, if you're a firm that's just about, hey, we want to make as much money as possible, you're going to attract people who want that. And you should just be clear in your marketing and your messaging and your job ads and your interviews what it is that you exist for. So I would get some real clarity around that, because like attracts like, and it's hard to be a magnet when you're trying to sort of be everything to everyone. We're the killer, you're going to make all sorts of money and you're going to have a great lifestyle firm, and people can sort of see through that. So I would say know who you are, and then put it out there in everything you do.
I love it. And that would have been a big part of growing, trying to make sure everyone knows who the firm is and what your culture is. When you think about the growth of the firm more generally, what do you think the key levers of growth were for the firm to grow so rapidly?
Yeah, I mean, the key levers were significant investments in technology. We were a tech forward firm first, so we we're always on the cutting edge of what technology was available, and that did in investing in the development of systems, processes, and tech allowed us to add people more easily. We also really invested in a we had a knowledge database, an internal database, a private Wikipedia system of that grew to close to 1,000 pages of all sorts of things where people had a knowledge database and they can look at things. Ultimately, we developed Connecticut Trial Firm University using Trainual to help onboard because as you're growing, onboarding becomes and training becomes a very hard thing. Hiring, onboarding, training become constants and you need to be good and efficient at that. And I think clarity surrounding where the firm was going, the values of the firm, and implementing, we ran on entrepreneurial operating system EOS as outlined in a book Traction by Gino Wickman, which is a great book on how to run small businesses, an operating system for small businesses. I think that was a critical decision to allowing us to grow in a way that worked.
And did the growth levers change as the firm matured and maybe hit that 5-year mark? What did that look like then?
I could speak for myself here as somebody who's CEO of the firm. What growth for a lot of the firm's history involved me doing more. Okay, well, just constantly on the go, smashing all the buttons. But then once we hit, 30, 35 people, the growth happened when I let go. And so I think it required a different mindset shift and allowing other people, not just delegating tasks or projects, but really delegating leadership of the firm ultimately was necessary to helping the firm, I would say, grow beyond 25 people.
Was there a role in particular that you hired for or first kind of gave let the reins loose a bit that really was pivotal in that?
Yeah, I think really when we started talking about having a chief operating officer and really sort of taking operations very seriously in the firm, that's when things started to change. It was first my wife, Allison, and she did a remarkable job because my job at some point became not to just manage the day to day of the firm, but to actually grow the firm, to open new lines of business, to build brand, to recruit talent, those kinds of functions to identify opportunities for the firm to be more profitable or more efficient. And then ultimately, as we grew even more, we brought in another COO, Kyle Bergquist. And Kyle had, 25 years experience and he's a master's in business from University of Virginia and was somebody who was very data and tech heavy to help lead the firm to sort of the next level. So it was really, I think, a combination of supporting and growing those two people and in their roles that ultimately allowed me to focus on what I needed to focus on to take the firm where I needed it to go.
Mhm. And was there any particular part of scaling that you were most passionate about?
I think the thing that I was passionate about with scaling was doing it right, and what I mean by that is, like, when it's you and you're the lawyer and you've got a client, it's easy to provide a high level of customer service, right? You're because client service lawyers are in a client service business and a results business, but it's really we'll say client service and results. You can make sure that the work is done right, you can make sure that the client's responded to, you sort of have a lot of control over that, right? But scaling quality and scaling care become much more challenging. And so I was passionate about growing while at the same time maintaining that quality that got us there in the first place.
Mhm. And I wanted to ask also the most challenging thing, but it kind of sounds like that was the most challenging thing whilst also being the thing you were most passionate about.
No question. I think that is the challenge for any entrepreneur out there. Most entrepreneurs start out, they own the pie shop and they're because they love to make pies. They're great at making pies, but there's only so many pies that they can make. And then ultimately, if they want to grow and not be making pies all day, they have to train, hire other people, and ultimately they have to have shops that they're not even in, let alone managing if you're really looking to scale any sort of business. So that becomes a challenge.
For sure. And so we've touched on how CT, Trial Firm, and your prior firm have always been technologically advanced. And I think in 2012, the law firm was already paperless. Can you share what your tech stack was back then and kind of how that's morphed over time?
Yeah. So, I mean, the tech stack, interestingly, didn't change a ton because in 2012, that was really, at that point, the cloud was mature enough, like the broadband speeds were good enough, the uptime was reliable enough to sort of have this. So, in 2012, I started using Dropbox. We used Google Workspace, Ring Central. We used a legal case management software called Clio, which is probably the biggest case management. It has become the biggest case management software in the country, if not the world. And then as we started Connecticut Trial Firm, we just added some things. I'm sorry, we always use QuickBooks Online and Adobe Cloud. Those were things that were constants. But with Connecticut Trial Firm, we added Slack, we added Zoom and just various sort of add-on pieces that were connected through Zapier and a whole series of things. But I would say that the core of the tech stack, Dropbox, Google Workspace, all really stayed the same.
And one thing that did change was your case management system to Filevine.
Yes, because what had happened was Clio was geared towards sort of hourly billable firms. And no matter how much I tried to tweak Clio, I couldn't get it to do what I needed it to do for personal injury because in personal injury in the United States, we don't bill by the hour. Get paid on what we recover when we win. So there's a real economic incentive to be efficient. You don't want things taking longer than they should need to take because you're losing money essentially from a business perspective. Uh, So Filevine was software that we felt had the automation, the reporting tools necessary to help us grow. And actually, Filevine was founded by a friend of mine named Ryan Anderson. And Ryan looked at Clio and said, I can do better, and started building other software. I looked at Clio and just said, oh, geez, I wish it were better. And then I found Filevine and off we went with that. But that was a big decision that helped us having the right software in 2024, whatever business that you're in is incredibly important.
And so, keeping on that theme, and since you have started a legal consulting business, I'd love to pick your brain on the whole kind of process that a law firm might go through when selecting technology. And we might use a practice management system or case management system as an example. So, a platform like Clio or Filevine. Perhaps starting with the very start of like self reflection, knowing that you actually have to switch practice management systems or get one to start with if it's a different piece of technology. What does that process look like for you?
Yeah, I mean, the like in what I can tell you, having worked with firms for years on this informally, is that the problem's not usually the software. The problem is usually the firm. And so, what I mean by that is a lot of this software will do what you need it to do. But the problems become where, the firm is like, well, we want to do real estate and personal injury and estate planning. And it's like, well, you really have to understand that you've probably got to build three different tech stacks for those three different verticals because they all have nuance and things, and there's going to be software packages that do a whole bunch of different things. And so there's an inclination on the part of lawyers to want like one piece of software to rule them all. And they want it sort of working in one way. But I look at that and I really think like, wow, that's really like a business systems opportunity because why do you have this many practice areas? Why are you the restaurant that's serving pizza, Mexican, and Chinese food? Maybe that makes sense. Maybe it does. You're a small town and that makes a lot of sense. But if you're in any sort of competitive market in a city, the Mexican pizza, Chinese restaurant isn't where people are going for food because it's just doing any one thing well is very hard. Doing 3 things well is incredibly hard. So I really encourage them to start looking at the profitability of various verticals that they have, really challenge them as to what they can stop doing, get them to focus on where they want to be, and understand too, like, I did this for a long time, so I'm not asking firms to do anything different than I did. I very much wanted to just do, uh, personal injury, but I needed to make money, so I would do family law. But the goal was always to stop doing family law so I could just do personal injury. But you have to be really intentional about your business structures. And then once you have a real idea as to if you can sort through those issues, then you can start identifying software, I think, that is best suited for the various verticals that you're in. And what I mean by best suited is easiest for these firms to build without investing a lot of money. Because a lot of these firms with API and integrations and hiring private developers and all these things can be twisted in a whole host of ways. But the question is, how much work is it going to be to get you? Generally, if you're a small firm, you don't have those massive budgets necessary to bridge those gaps. So it becomes working them through that process and then matching the product to fit their needs.
When you get to the point of going out to the market, so you might have decided that you're just going to focus on personal injury law and you need to go out and find what technology there might be. Do you suggest going to conferences, booking demos online, talking to people, going to a consultant? What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, what I would suggest is looking at law firms that are doing the thing that you want to do. So if it's like, wow, there's this big PI firm, well, talk to them. What software are they using? And understand that it may not be right for you. There are some of these programs that these large firms use that, the programs themselves won't even sign up unless you're, 35 or 50 licenses or something. But, what are some of the players in the space? There are online forums that can help you. And then once you get recommendations from trusted colleagues, definitely do the demos and see what pieces of software that there are that make sense for you, your circumstances. And the other, I think, real key thing here is to look at software that you can grow into. So there are some case management softwares out there right now, and I'm not going to name them, but that don't really have API. And it's like, well, in 2024, you really want to be looking for the ability to easily connect it with other pieces of software.
So, those are kind of touching on some green and red flags to look for when selecting a case management system. Is there anything else that would be a big green flag when selecting a piece of technology?
Yeah, green flag meaning go for it, right? One of the things that you really want, I think, to look at, one of the things I always find interesting is, what positions are these people hiring? Look for companies that are consistently hiring engineers and like what areas are they hiring engineers for? So when you're looking out there and you're like, oh, wow, they're hiring a lot of AI based engineers, that's a very strong signal that this company is investing significant amounts of money in artificial intelligence and you want to be riding that wave. So I would peep on their LinkedIn, their Indeed profiles, wherever you can sort of find their job postings and see, well, all they seem to be hiring is salespeople. That's a good sign that maybe the product is not going to be invested in by the company as you may hope and can grow with it. Robust API is also a very big must because things change, needs change, and no one piece of software can do everything.
And is there any waving big red flag?
Yeah, I mean, I think no API. I would really look at what I would talk with different, and I'm going to say this as a word of caution. In online forums, you are going to find people who love any piece of this software and hate this software. So be sort of skeptical in some of these groups as to very extreme opinions. But I mean, I think some better questions to ask are, asking existing users, can you talk about improvements that this company has made in the software? Can you talk about customer support? Can you talk about, I mean, I would look for talking about improvements. When did you start? What was it like? What's it like now? What have they done? What is the rate of development of these things? Do they charge for these things? Are they add-ons? Like, how does that all work? Because it's a big pain to start changing this kinds of software as you grow. People in the industry know that it's very sticky software because they're just, once you're in, you're in.
Mm. Our previous guest, Cameron Madrick, he said that one of the best things about a piece of technology that they adopted was that it wasn't mature, but that was the best thing about it. And that kind of speaks to what you're saying about the growth of the product and the new features and the rate at what it is built. And there are a lot of new pieces of technology, and it's always a bit more risky, maybe, if you go with them, but you can reap the rewards by the growth at which they build new things.
E- Exactly. And the other sorts of things is, and this is sort of a mindset one, which is that people often get hung up on price, but really, like, software, like, I always think of software on your balance sheet is an asset, just like your employees are an asset and not a liability. So really start thinking, well, okay, this may cost me $300 a seat, but boy, it's going to save me from hiring 5 different people. Okay, the monthly cost is high. You've got to be able to make it, but look at what it can do for you realistically.
We also mentioned before APIs, like a platform having API is almost a must in 2024. Can you speak to the benefits of what an API enables law firms to do?
Very simply, in the United States, most small businesses will use QuickBooks by Intuit to do their accounting and accounting software, right? And so no case management software is going to build accounting software as robust as QuickBooks. It's just not possible. So what API does is it allows your API is simply a language which two programs can talk to each other in. So it can say, look, in FileVine, we have an expense. It's on the Joe Smith case. We're writing a check to Dr. Jones. The check is in the amount of $720 on July 2nd, 2024. And it can take that information, it can push it into QuickBooks, generate the check. When the check is generated, it takes a check number and puts it back into FileVine so that there's a record in FileVine and a record in QuickBooks without the user having to manually update information. And this plays out all over the place. You get a new client in Clio, you want to add them to your mailing list in MailChimp, that can all happen in the background. So it becomes very important for your data to be able to flow within apps easily because there's no one app to rule them all.
Exactly. I think any new legal tech product you see out there, they all, in some way, shape, or form, probably integrate into the practice management system. And so there's a bunch more tools out there that can be plugged in to FileVine, for example.
Right. And there's always going to be needs that are unique to some firms. Like there's just like, well, and FileVine's not going to be able to build for some one-off firm in Montana that really wants to integrate with this weird app, but it really works well for them. So having it very easy to be able to do, whether you're using Workato or Zapier or some other tool or some native integration becomes, I think, a very important thing.
Yeah. And one example that I'll bring up here, usually, well, File Notes is sponsored by VXT, and I don't usually bring in this relationship, but another example of how a legal technology platform like VXT, which is a phone system for lawyers, can use an API to integrate with FileVine. So all of your calls and transcriptions can be saved against a case in FileVine. So having an API is definitely a must for the whole other suite of tools like VXT
That's
and QuickBooks.
That's incredibly valuable what you just said because these programs can pull caller ID, they can match it to projects, they can put notes in projects, they can create tasks saying, "Hey, call this person back." And it all just happens in the background. So, being able to integrate with that and look, not every lawyer is going to be able to use their own phone system. So, just the ability for it to be able to do these things is, I think, very powerful, Sophie.
Exactly. And so the next stage, so we kind of just spoke about selecting technology. When you've selected your technology and it gets to implementing it, it's a massive task if we're still thinking about case management systems. Do you think do it yourself, do it with the vendor, an external partner?
Yeah, it really depends on how big you are and how much, the bigger you are, the more people you should be working with because they can guide look, when I started with Filevine, there were two and a half of us. So it was relatively easy because I was probably doing 70% of the use of the product at the time. But as when I left the firm, I was probably doing half of 1% of work in the product. Like just so as you scale in the low hanging fruit becomes so you set up your fields and you set up this that it's all very easy. And then you start wanting to do more complicated things, integrations. And so you're going to use vendors to that. So my basic thing with anybody who is doing this is you need to ship a minimally viable product, like take your best guess as to what it is that you need, and then form a committee of stakeholders in the product who can then constantly iterate the product over time. Say, hey, could it do this? Or I don't like how it does this. Can we do that? Because your workflows are going to change, the product is going to change. You're not going to be able to think through and understand everything. And yes, working with a partner to implement this is very useful because most firms aren't going to have, say, case management admins on their team unless they're probably about 100 people or so. And so working with a vendor is a great way to speed that process up. And like what we do at Bestera is we're able to help on the other side of that coin, not the technical side, but the organizational side. Let's get the meetings. Let's get, who do we need on board? How are we going to get them on board? What is the schedule? Encouraging the leadership, making sure that the leadership is bought in on it and laying out a clear vision as to why the software is being implemented.
What do you think the biggest issue is for the implementation of software to not go smooth?
Biggest issues are lack of buy-in from leadership, like leadership saboteurs of software. And when I talk to firms who are committed, they see the benefits of this. They see the benefits of the enhanced efficiencies and they see that this is where this is going. So I hear very little resistance to that. But what I hear is sort of a lack of willingness to lead through it because sometimes people who were on your train, so to speak, that got you to where you are, they might not be going with you to the next stop. Like they might not be who you need. And so I always say, look, this is a critical thing. You've just invested a significant amount of money in it. And, you have to be willing to sort of say, like, look, this is where we're moving. And if you're not on board, paralegal or lawyer, we're going to need you to start looking for another job. And really mean it. And then also really engage. Don't just delegate this project to your paralegal. They're busy. They have lots to do. And not knocking a paralegal, but it is that important that you get it right, that you're hands on and that you're listening to your team, that you're getting feedback and you're understanding and you're selling really that this is an iterative process. It's not uh, set in stone. It's going to always be changed. And we're always going to work to make your life easier. Why? Because then we can make more money. We can pay you better. We can give you better benefits and sort of really keep explaining the why and the vision for the firm.
Yeah, some great tips. And so everything we've kind of spoken about already has kind of revolved around the business of law. And you've not only written books on this, which I can see in the back, Tiger Tactics, but you also teach a business of law class at the University of Connecticut. Speaking from a New Zealand law school perspective, we don't have any classes that touch on the business of law, nor do they talk about it at all. I'd love to know what you actually teach in this class.
Yeah, so in United States, we don't have those courses either. They don't exist, and much to the chagrin of many lawyers who are like, they don't ever teach these very important things in law school. Well, the dean of UConn Law, Ebony Nelson, liked my LinkedIn post, and she was like, "Ryan, you need to come teach here at UConn." She asked me out to dinner, and I said, "Okay, but can I teach how I'd want to teach it?" She's like, "Absolutely." I give you full reign to teach this, how you would want to teach this. And I said, okay, I am in on this. So it's a one-off course at UConn. I don't know. I mean, some other law schools may dabble a little bit in some law practice management, but this course is a comprehensive course on the business of law. So we're going to start with, I don't know, maybe familiar to your readers, but a book called E-Myth, where it sort of talks about Sarah the pie maker making the pie, that example I just gave you, and how that's the problem of law, which is that if you're a lawyer, you can't grow a business just doing more law. Like you are a lawyer at that point. So the business has to shift. And what do you need to do to shift that business? Well, we're going to look at establishing the vision and values for your firm. We're going to look at how you would brand and market a firm, how to do digital marketing, how to do traditional or sort of offline marketing. We're going to look through finance, systems, management, data, hiring, tech. And so the sort of vision for this is that we work through them actually building a firm of their own, like on paper. Like,
Yeah.
let's name it. How would you get a logo? How would you register it? How would you solve it? What software solutions would you implement for your business? And try to get them to think through those problems. And look, most people are not going to go out of law school and start their own firm. Some of them will, but some of these people may become managers of law firms. Or at the very least, it's going to, if they're an associate at a law firm, it's going to help them because they're going to have a better understanding of the general business operations of a law firm.
I love it. I think that would be very useful for every law student, whether that be in the United States or anywhere else in the world. Being in the position as a thought leader and consultant, how do you see the future of the legal practice evolving, especially with AI?
Yeah. The future of law is really the past of law, and it's a very human. And what I mean by that is law in society in the past 50, 100 years, 20 years, 10 years has become infinitely more connected and complicated in just every which way. I graduated law school in 2005. There was no Facebook, there was no Bitcoin, there was like none of these things. And then those are just very small examples of things that how society has evolved and regulations surrounding these things and all sorts of and that's just the technological side of things, but there's advancements in medicine, political change. There's all these things. The world is so much more complicated, and accordingly, there's so much more law. So things have become very complicated. And if you're working on a litigation case, you're not dealing with 10 documents. You're dealing with 100,000 documents, right? So it's in all of these cases and all of these statutes. And AI is going to really help with the work I just talked about. It's going to help go through those 100,000 documents. It's going to help ascertain what the law is or what it should be or what are good arguments or what are the problems with arguments. It's going to help you edit a brief to make it more persuasive. I mean, it's going to help in all of those ways. It's very assistive technology, but and it's going to, in many ways, outperform most lawyers, and then it'll eventually outperform every lawyer. But what you still need is at the end of every problem is a person. Even if you're representing a business, even if you're representing government, you're dealing with a person who is relying upon you for the strategic advice. What do I do? The counseling part of it, the wisdom to be able to navigate between multiple choices. And to me, that's the space that lawyers are going to occupy a lot more than just reading tens of thousands of pages of documents and summarizing them. That's gone.
Yeah, I really like that. And I wonder if, kind of touching on the papers you can take at law school, I wonder if they will change in relation to how law might be practiced in the near future.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I mean, my belief is that law schools are probably more conservative and behind the curve, but I think eventually it has to. Like the market will dictate, and the market will change the way schools approach to meet the needs of the profession.
Are there any AI tools already that you would say, go look at these straight away if you are an attorney?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, the paid version of ChatGPT, like the 4.0 is incredible at the ability to summarize and I mean, data visualization, I mean, it's formatting, I mean, just really robust in and of itself, I think is impressive. Google's Gemini product also for workspace is incredibly impressive. I don't use search anymore. Like it's just so easy to use Gemini to plug in and to get answers. It is like the best web browser of all. And, in the legal specific realm, there's a product called Clear Brief that is pretty cool that helps organize briefs that's sort of, tailored to law. There's a phone system called Capture Now, which is sort of an after hours phone answering service that uses I don't know. I just think that there's lots of uses in those ways, but honestly, familiarizing yourself with your Perplexity is another one of like a GPT, Chat GPT. But I mean, really, what's happened is that the most of the legal apps, they're powered by Chat GPT. So understanding what things are like from the source is pretty cool.
Mm. And any concerns or warnings around AI in the legal realm?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, you've got to know the data privacy policies. And if it's free, you're the product. And really look at the products that allow you to, that aren't training on your data, that delete data, that do those different things. So that's thing number one. And the other thing is to not think of AI as a calculator. Like it's not perfect in that way. AI is like a person and people can get overwhelmed and people can make mistakes. So even if you had, for example, you're at a firm and you had a great associate who was, boy, they're top of their class and they seem to get it, like you're still going to check their work. And so I think a mistake is to not think of AI as a person, to make sure that you're also giving how many times in law firms, any associate out there will know, the partner doesn't give good directions. Well, if you're the prompter using AI and you're not giving good prompts, like you're going to get things back that aren't relevant. So I would work on your prompts. I would work on uh, not just accepting it. I would audit it. I would check it and, use it like you would a person. Like if you had a paralegal draft a complaint, you're going to go over it.
Great tips. And to wrap up this episode, I've got some quick fire questions for you that you can answer with a sentence or word, whatever comes to mind. So, kicking it off, what do people not understand about the law that you wish they did?
I wish they understood that it's human. Law is not law is also not a calculator, right? And so your cases really depend upon the lawyers, the judges, the witnesses. It is a very human process. So all the good and bad of humanity plays out in law.
And what single element would you change about the legal industry today?
I would increase access to justice. There are too many people out there whose legal needs are not being met.
And if you could give any piece of advice to someone who's in a similar position to yourself at the start of your career, or perhaps just graduating, what would it be?
Two things. One is figure out if you're going into private practice, how to develop a book of business. And the second thing is very much familiarize yourself with cutting edge technology. Increasingly, the work of law is tied to tech. So if you can understand and master the tech, you're going to have a good career as a lawyer.
I love it. And if you weren't a lawyer, what would be your dream job other than your new consulting business?
I'd be an airline pilot. I love to travel and see the world. And I am a person who's not scared to fly. I love being on a plane and I would be an airline pilot.
I love it. So thank you so much, Ryan. I really enjoyed speaking to you about everything growing a law firm, technology, AI, all the hot topics. If anyone would like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
Follow me on LinkedIn.
Definitely follow Ryan on LinkedIn. He posts all the time and there's super valuable content.
Well, thank you, Sophie. Thank you for having me.